It just came to me why HAARP up in Alaska was shut down. It was an experiment. Yeah, they finished and completed it, but what were they testing? Every single aerial, if you know anything about HAARP, it was a series of rows and columns of aerials, ground aerials that were not very tall, and they were spaced very close together in rows and columns, neat little rows and columns, with a fence around it. Very small area. What it was a scaled down version of the utility power grid. Every aerial represented one grounding point that the utility grid has of its equipment. Namely, it's spread out, though. So that's why the HAARP is a scaled-down version where it's tightly compacted. But the utility grid, every certain distance, and there's a grounding point for some of the equipment. Let's say it's the mast that holds up the power line, or it's the neutral on the power line. Whatever it is, it gets grounded. There's a lot of safety features built into the utility grid, and that's why HAARP was used, because now they don't need it, because they've learned how to do whatever they did with HAARP, they can do it with the utility grid. The problem is the utility grid is isolated from the consumer at the pole transformer. The pole transformer separates the consumer, isolates him electrically, not magnetically. They're magnetically coupled through the pole transformer, but they electrically, the electric fields are isolated. And that the electric field is the very thing the HAARP was manipulating. So to access the, well, how can I put this? The leverage that the consumer could contribute to the grid if they were electrically connected to the grid and not electrically isolated, requires that a jumper be placed across the pole transformer to electrically unite the consumer's house wiring and all their load appliances with the grid. Now, what difference is there? You know, this has been bothering me for some time. Why does Berkeley Spice simulator always model a voltage source with the polarity of the voltage is normal, the way we would expect, it's positive orientation, but the current is negative. It's out of phase by 180 degrees. Doesn't matter whether it's a battery voltage source or an AC generator voltage source. In both instances, the current is always depicted as being out of phase by 180 degrees. In the case of an AC, in the case of a battery, it's simply negative. And I always thought, that's peculiar and queer. Why would you want to do that? And it makes sense because of negative unity power factor is the definition of a generator of power. It's providing power, while a consumer of power, namely our appliances, is a positive unity power factor. Now what that means is, you see, normally a capacitor and a coil stand in between those two extremes. They neither produce power nor consume it because they deviate or separate the phase relation between current and voltage by a mere 90 degrees, which is considered zero power factor. And it's considered useless because you're neither consuming power nor producing it. But when we have an appliance, the current and the voltage are in phase. There's no separation. There's zero separation between current and voltage. And so they consume power because they can dissipate it, because they can thermodynamically engage the laws of conservation and thermodynamics, because the current is engaging the voltage with zero difference of phase relation between them in time. This is all a time relation. But when the phase relation is out of phase by 180 degrees between current and voltage, there is no consumption of power. All it can do is produce it. And that's what producers, why appliances that produce power are modeled electrically in simulators this way, with 180 degrees or half a cycle of phase relation, or polarity if you prefer to call it in DC terms, oppositional polarity between current and voltage. This is important because when you're dealing with the generator plant in the hydroelectric plant, okay, the generator has got phase relation separation between voltage and current of 180 degrees. Battery, same thing. The current is negative with respect to the voltage, which is positive because it's sharing its affluence of energy with the circuit. It's got an abundance of benevolence, and it wants to share it with the circuit until the battery goes dead. Then it's not producing any current in opposition to the polarity of its voltage. Well, our appliances are isolated from the grid due to the pole transformer isolating our homes and businesses from the grid electrically. And this is not good because they want to use the utility grid to do the same thing that HAARP did. Whatever HAARP did, the utility grid is now being used to do it. So it's not just to sabotage the grid to make us open to an EMP attack. It is the source of an EMP production malfeasance, maladroit, there you go, maladroit manipulation of the environment. Malevolent manipulation, because, they're practicing black magic. Charlie Lutz defined black and white magic. Black magic is simply the use of power for selfish purposes. That's all. It's the only difference between black and white magic. White magic, you're using power selflessly for the benefit of others. Black, you use it for yourself, for personal gain. The few benefit at the expense of the many. That's the way black magic works. And it always takes you down the left-hand path, which Charlie was using symbolically to represent the corruption of the mind. Because you're using the mind to dominate your physical environment, and you're doing so abusively towards other people. And, there are a lot of stories about HAARP that have manipulated the weather, it created earthquakes, Fukushima or whatever, that nuclear reactor on the shore, we have to build it on the shore. No, that's not safe. No, we got to build, and on a fault line. No, it's not safe. No, we got to do it anyway. And so they pushed ahead, they did it, and then it was manipulated. It was destroyed. So now they can use the utility grid because every grounding point is a nodal point. It's either an antinode or a node. Depending on how they formulate the ripples of waves that are stretched across the continent, in which each nodal or antinodal grounding point is situated in the wave action, the wave behavior that they're creating across the tangentially or horizontally across the surface of the planet, horizontally, tangentially to the center of the Earth. They're creating these ripples, and the ripples have nodes and antinodes, but it's the electric field that they have to ionize. Why? Because they're trying, it's all tied in with chemtrail spraying. You got all these nano-sized metallic objects, particles in the air, and you want to electrify them. Well, how do you do that? You could use HAARP, but HAARP is, a scaled-down version of the utility grid. The utility grid's a lot easier because it's the power's there for free. It's already there, being provided, and we're paying for it. We are, aren't we? We're paying for mass destruction. How nice. I was thinking about chemtrail spraying, and how they did that in Canada, to create forest fires. They'd hygroscopically spray magnesium along with other elements in the atmosphere to pull moisture out of the ground. They spray in the summertime, and you get all this ground cloud cover. And then they'd stop spraying, and then you'd have a forest fire because the ground was brittle. The plants, the trees were brittle, dry. There was no moisture there. So a fire would get started, and it would rage all over the place and burn up a whole section of the Canadian forest. which you would imagine, why would that happen? Canadian forests, there should be tons of moisture there. They're up north, right? They get lots of rain, right? Well, not when you've got chemtrails spraying, pulling moisture out of the ground and sticking it up in the high elevations of the atmosphere. You got nothing to protect the forest against forest fire raging across the Canadian landscape. So I began to think, it just hit me. It was just a vision, what are all those aerials so closely packed together in the HAARP, in the now extinct HAARP project? What are those representing? They have to represent something, or else they wouldn't be so close together, tightly packed. They're the grounding points of the utility grid, compressed in a scaled-down model of the utility grid. And so why were they able to switch over from HAARP to the utility grid? Because they're now making use of our appliances as the inverse of a producer. You've got to, how do I put this? See, I think loosely. I'm a loosey-goose thinker, and so it's easy for me to come up with inspirations. They may not be, they may be phantasmically way off the mark, but sometimes they're on the mark because I don't worry about the details, that I don't understand everything. But what I see is, if our appliances are the inverse of a generator, in which they are skewed the most oppositionally they can be. See, we think it's normal. Oh, the current and the voltage are in phase with zero difference of phase relation between them. No, that's weird. And yet we take it to be normal because that's what a resistor is, right? A resistor is 0 degrees of difference between, it puts everything back together again and emits heat or light because it puts it back together again. But a coil and a capacitor are actually normal because that's the normal way that energy is in the universe, is that it's askew. It's separated from each other and useless. That's the way energy is in the universe. That's why it's safe. That's why there's so much energy in the universe, because it's safe. It's askew. It's useless. It's 0 degrees of, it's 0 power factor, because it's 90 degrees of phase relation between the current and the voltage. Either the voltage is ahead of the current by 90 degrees or the current is ahead of the voltage by 90 degrees. Either way, it's useless. It's 0 power factor. But when you get it to be 1 unity, positive 1 power factor or negative 1 power factor, it's now useful because you're either spending energy or you're consuming it. You're either spending energy or you're producing it. And they are man-made inventions. It's man-made to have unity power factor. It's man-made to have negative unity power factor. It's a man-made artifice of our modern life. Capacitors and coils are natural. They are the natural way of electrodynamics in the environment. And you pay for their union. You pay for it with either the slow death of the creature producing electricity inside their physiology when they bring current and voltage together, or if you separate it 180 degrees out of phase, you get stress. So you either get life or you get stress, but you get something. But when it's 90 degrees out of phase, you get nothing. So what's the point? How can you use the utility grid to your advantage as a HAARP project on a large, vast scale if you don't have access to the appliances that are at the other end of the diametric opposition? You have to have both. So that's the way I look at it in terms of symmetrical balance. If you're going to have the hydroelectric plant be 180 degrees out of phase, now you need the appliances. Well, we just had a power outage 2 days ago, and they turned off all across the state of California. They voluntarily sacrificed the power to the consumer because of the high demand during this hot summer days where everybody's running their air conditioning. And so, I'm thinking to myself, no, they're not. They could have balanced the load with reactive ingredients to, no, but they don't bother. They don't bother to build enough equipment to do it on these extreme days, so they just shut down the power. But they can take care of it. It's called load balancing. And you don't do load balancing by sacrificing power to the consumer. They just don't want to bother adding in the extra infrastructure of extra copper wire or extra capacitor banks or whatever it takes to accommodate more power. And that's, that's a political decision on their part. They don't want to spend the money and take the trouble to do it, but they can produce any amount of power they want to through load balancing. And load balancing doesn't mean you cut off the power to your client who's paying the bill. No, it means you invest in more equipment to accommodate everybody's needs on those rare summer days when it does get hot and everybody's running their AC. Come on. So it made me think in terms of how the power grid is used and the excuses they make when they don't want to get off their lazy butts and do something about it. They'll sacrifice our power instead. And so I came back. I was visiting somebody else whose power did not go out, or else we would have noticed that we couldn't watch TV. But just 2 blocks away was my apartment, and the power had been shut off, and I came back to seeing my microwave oven and the other digital clock on my electric stovetop range flashing, showing that the power had been off for 20 minutes, because it was 20 minutes behind. Because I had a battery-operated clock showing me what the real time was, and I thought, 20 minutes went by, the power was off. Good thing I wasn't here. So when these lies, that tell us, oh, we can't handle it, we got to shut down your different sections, we sacrificed you in your area to accommodate a lazy version of load balancing, when they could easily do load balancing with the right equipment and invested in their infrastructure, they could accommodate us with any amount of power we want to consume. They know it, and we don't. We are generally ignorant on that subject. But I know enough to know now that's what load balancing really means in electrodynamic terms. It doesn't mean you look for a fall guy. The consumer's consuming too much power, you greedy consumers. No, they just don't want to bother investing in the infrastructure to create any amount of power we want to consume. Because they can do it. Because they got a utility grid, and it's set up to do just that if they want to make use of the potential that's set up there. They can take it to a greater extreme if they want to, but they don't want to. They want to keep things. Then word may get out. No, that's tremendous amount of power consumption. We know the power company's not producing that much power, so where are they getting the extra power? Ooh, they must have access to free energy technology. Ooh, how come they're not sharing it with us? How come they're charging us for power? Yeah, the secret would get out, see, so they have to sacrifice. They have to be lazy to keep it secret, to keep free energy a secret. It's all about reactive power. There's nothing else on the subject. Oliver Heaviside and Steinmetz already wrote the subject on free energy, and Tesla's confused us with new terminology that was so out of the ballpark of electrical engineers' terminology to make him go, to make us go, wow, Tesla, you came up with something that nobody else came up with. No, that's not true. Everybody's doing it. They just want to hush it up. Tesla was flamboyant. What do you want? And he was humanitarian. He wanted to save the world. But he did want to take all the credit. Who wouldn't, Who wouldn't want the little, I did that for you. Who wouldn't want that yummy feeling of being the savior of the planet? Make everybody feel good. It's a very natural urge to want to help one's neighbor. So there's nothing wrong with Tesla doing it. It's kind of created a problem because it's confused people. All the liberal thinkers who want to believe in free energy think they got something that nobody else possesses. Radiant energy, ooh. No, it's just reactive power. That's all it is. Good grief. Engineers know about it, but they want to stick their finger up their nose and make believe they don't know anything, because they'll lose their job if they admit to knowing anything. And the technicians in the field, I just do my job, I'm do what I'm told, and I want to get paid at the end of the day, and I don't know nothing. Yeah, everybody's just playing a game. Anyway, so the game here is manipulation of the environment for not necessarily altruistic purposes, selfish purposes. That's what HAARP is all about. And now it's been implemented in the grid, which is nothing new. The grid has been privy to selfish purposes for half a century at least. John Cunningham Lilly of dolphin investigation fame, he and a friend of his figured this out, that the grid is home to a particular frequency that makes the human brain susceptible to programming. It loosens the cords of resistance, critical judgment, so that when they put something else, let's say on TV, we'll be susceptible. Oh, yes, like zombies. You end up behaving mentally like zombies. Anybody who's tied to that shit is a mental zombie and believes anything they hear. It's because, it's populist thinking. We want to belong to the group. We don't want to be disenfranchised from, the belonging to the collective group think, because we would be ostracized and chastised, and we don't want that. Anyway, so this is my little contribution to why HAARP existed, why it came into being, and why we have the utility grid is being sabotaged. Because now the utility grid is the implementation of the HAARP project on a vast scale, global. Whatever the HAARP was, now the cat's out of the bag, and it's everywhere. But to do it, you have to short out the pole transformer so that the neutral on the grid side of the pole transformer and the neutral on the client side of the pole transformer are electrically connected to access our loads as an important ingredient to add to the utility grid so that the utility grid can be electrically manipulated as an electric device. This is, not magnetics. This is electric. Longitudinal, magnetodielectric, LMD, is because it's the most powerful form of energy. They know that. Or else they wouldn't be sabotaging the grid to access our appliances. So it's not just the little smart meters, That was the first step. Oh, if you're willing to do that, and yes you are, we know you're so compliant, then you're willing to give up your appliances to act as instrumentation source. Think of it as they got to have a sink. And it's not enough to be grounded to the earth, because that's a passive sink. We need an active sink. And it's to help create a node or an antinode. Because has nothing to do with production or consumption of power per se. It's the points of production and consumption being used as nodes and antinodes to replace the aerials that they had tightly compacted at the HAARP project. That's what they need, are nodes and antinodes. And you don't get that with 90 degrees phase relation between current and voltage. You need 180 degrees or 0 degrees to get a node or an antinode. And that's what they need. They need those nodal points and those antinodal points so they can set up the ripples, the electric field ripples, all across the land to cross-interfere just in the right way to manipulate the electric field of the environment. This is what they're doing. They're playing with the electric field of the environment. And they've already been doing it through HAARP in Alaska. Now they're doing it globally through the utility grid. So now you know. The cat's out of the bag. Spread it around and feel more miserable than you felt already. This is why I do my ears every morning, because when I sit down to meditate, I'm chock full of worries. I am so anxious and worried because I know too much. And it bothers me that I know so much. Knowledge is a burden. It's not always a levity. Sometimes it's a damn burden. So I do whatever I can to calm down. And if I need to use a psychophysiological technique because I can't use a psychological technique anymore to take the sole burden of relaxing me, then I manipulate myself physically to create a psychological effect. I have to. Because I have to calm down. Because I know so much, it's so disturbing that it bothers me to know it. And know that I'm totally helpless to do anything about it. This is the weird extreme karma of my birth. I can know anything I want to, but I can't do a damn thing about it. That's enough to drive anybody into depression or anxiety or both alternately. Or be ridiculously drunk with extreme fantasy or mood making so as to stay out of reality and be in fantasy. I mean, whatever. It's screwy. Why do I want to go in bliss? Because bliss resets the brain to its default condition of a clean slate. So I can come back out into activity and tell you about this miserable stuff I've learned while I was ensconced in my bed relaxing with hydrogen peroxide and silver water mixing in my ear and fizzing away. Re-imbibing my physiology with silver hydroperoxide so I could regenerate and rejuvenate and live a little longer. Whoa! Oh well. So I say I got to pay for this. I can't keep doing this. I'd end up in a mental institution if I didn't take care of myself. Literally, because I'd go nuts. And I was going nuts yesterday, spending a whole day on a circuit concept that was a waste of time because I was using Paul Falstad's simulator. His little website simulator, which has he refuses to allow people to have series resistance in his caps and coils. So it's like, come on, that is so unrealistic. Of course you're going to get free energy. Duh! And he's wondering, that's weird. That's not supposed to happen. Why? Because I'm supposed to construct the circuit a certain way and not my own way? Come on. Get real. You're supposed to prevent that. You're supposed to prevent unrealistic free energy from happening by having some realism in your caps and coils. It's called series resistance in the case of coils or equivalent series resistance in the case of capacitors. Come on. Make it a little difficult for me. Make it challenging. Don't make it this easy. I wasted a whole day on a circuit concept that's a waste of time. See, this is where my frustration comes from, and then I had to calm down this morning. Anyway, I better not get off on that, and that's going to upset me. Not this utility grid thing that's way beyond my ability to do anything about. No, that's beyond help. Okay, now is it hot in here? I'm getting hot in here. I think I have to turn the AC back on and contribute to my drainage of the power grid. Okay.